He thought I was the broke wife he had to rescue, but while he was stealing from our joint account, I was collecting rent from 3 apartments he never knew existed. And the day I handed him divorce papers was the day he found out just how expensive his mistake really was. Before we begin, comment below which city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. My name is Emily Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a quiet part of Portland, Oregon. By day, I run a design studio from home. By night, I manage 3 rental properties I inherited from my grandmother, properties I never told anyone about. Not even my husband. People say secrets destroy marriages. But in my case, mine saved me. But that's only because no one knows about the apartments. There are 3 of them. One in the Pearl District, sleek, modern, with a skyline view and stainless steel everything. One in Selwood, a cozy 2-bedroom with a fireplace and a tenant who pays 3 months in advance, every time. And one in Mount Tabor, older, but charming, with hand-carved banisters and a courtyard full of rose bushes my grandmother planted herself. All 3 of them are mine, not ours, not shared, not marital property, just mine. And when I married Josh, I told no one, not him, not his family, not even my closest friends. Because when I was 19, my grandmother sat me down and said something I didn't understand at the time. Don't advertise your blessings. Some people will love you less the more you have, especially if they think what you have should have been theirs. She wasn't bitter. She was wise. She'd lived through a husband who emptied her savings behind her back, a brother who borrowed her inheritance and never paid it back, and a friend who stole a house listing right from under her. So when she passed, and the lawyer called me to say the properties had been left in my name, free and clear, I thanked her in my heart and made a vow. I wouldn't brag, I wouldn't flaunt, and I wouldn't trust anyone with them until I knew they wouldn't try to take them. Josh never asked about money, not directly. He liked that I was independent, said it made him feel like we were equals, that we could build together. I smiled when he said that, not because I believed it, but because I wanted to. We met at a local art show. He was tall, confident, charming in the way people who've never been rejected are. He worked in tech sales, wore fitted shirts and expensive shoes, talked about future startups and vacations he hadn't yet taken. He listened, too, asked about my studio, my design work, my opinions on mid-century architecture. He told me I had a classic mind, which I think was supposed to be a compliment. We dated for a year, then a year and a half. The proposal was dreamy. A surprise trip to Santa Barbara. Sunset on the beach. A photographer hidden in the dunes. The ring, platinum, cushion cut, tasteful, had belonged to his great-grandmother, supposedly. Everyone said he was perfect, and I wanted to believe them. But 3 months before the wedding, I changed the locks on my accounts. Not because he had done anything wrong. Not yet. But because I remembered my grandmother's voice, clear as crystal. A man who loves you for your heart will never ask what's in your pockets. But a man who loves power will. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The apartments weren't listed under my full name. They were protected by an LLC, Hayes Property Holdings. The rental payments went into an account tied to the LLC. The tax filings were separate. Everything was clean, quiet, legal. And when the subject of a prenup came up, he laughed. I mean, do we really need that? He said, brushing it off. You're not Samaras, and I'm not Elon Musk. I laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything I needed to know. He had no idea. And I didn't correct him. I kept my assets quiet. And thank God I did. Because 5 months into our marriage, things began to change. It started with small things. Little jabs. He started calling my studio your little design gig. He would accidentally forget I had client meetings and plan things without asking. When I brought up boundaries, he'd say I was overreacting, that he was just trying to include me more. He insisted on managing our joint account, said it made sense since he was good with numbers. I didn't argue. I let him think he was in charge. I paid our half of things quietly, using income from my public work. But I never touched the rent checks. Never mentioned the tenants. Never said a word about the old shoebox in the closet that held 3 property titles, signed and sealed. I told myself this was temporary. A rough patch. A new marriage adjusting. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of a storm. One afternoon, I came home early and found him sitting at my desk, using my laptop. He looked up quickly, too quickly, and smiled that politician smile, the one that never quite touched his eyes. "I was just checking flights," he said. "Thinking of planning something for your birthday." My laptop screen was still on the browser. But it wasn't flights. It was Zillow. And it wasn't vacation rentals. It was listings. In my grandmother's neighborhood. I didn't say anything. I just walked into the kitchen, poured myself some water, and mentally opened the contingency folder in my mind, the one I had built long before I said I do. That night, I moved my LLC's funds into a private trust. A different bank, different address, new password. I didn't need to panic. I just needed to prepare. I didn't know yet what he was planning, but I knew what I had to protect. And so I waited, and I watched. And what I found out changed everything. Marriage doesn't usually fall apart with a bang. It unravels in quiet, deliberate tugs. In our case, it began with groceries. Josh started scanning receipts. Not the way budget-conscious couples do, but with judgment. Do we really need this brand? $8 for almond milk? You know, if you just let me do the shopping, we'd cut costs in half. I remember looking at him from across the kitchen island, my fingers still cold from unloading bags. His tone wasn't casual. It was edged sharp in places that used to be soft. This was the man who once ordered $90 steaks and left 30% tips to feel generous. The man who used to say, "It's not about money, it's about experience." But now, it was suddenly about money. Or rather, about control. He started calling our finances strategic. What he meant was, he made the decisions now. "Let me handle our investments," he said. "You hate dealing with numbers. You've got your little business, babe. I'll make sure everything else is handled. You trust me, right?" I didn't answer. Because if I said yes, I'd be lying. And if I said no, I'd be provoking him. So I just smiled, nodded, and watched. He moved our joint checking account to a bank I'd never used, changed the login info to protect us from fraud. Here he routed our credit card rewards to his personal card. It's more efficient this way. He forgot to tell me when our mortgage payment auto-deducted twice, and then acted annoyed when I asked. But I didn't argue. I played along, because what he didn't know was that I didn't need any of it. I had my own accounts. I had monthly rent flowing in from 3 tenants, each one paying on time, every time. I had savings, equity, backup, and most importantly, I had time. Time to let him build the illusion. Time to let him think I was under his wing. Let him think I was vulnerable, so he'd show me how dangerous he really was. And he did. One night over dinner, he brought it up like it was casual small talk. "Mark's starting a new company," he said between bites of pasta. "Crypto portfolio management. Really smart stuff." I said nothing. "He wants in early. It's a private round. We'd double our investment in 6 months, easy." "We?" I asked. Josh smiled, that charming, overconfident grin I used to find sexy. "I mean us. Our account. Our joint account." I clarified. "Yeah. Why?" I paused, sipped my wine, tilted my head slightly. I didn't know we were doing angel investing now. His smile dimmed a little. "Emily, it's a low-risk, high-yield opportunity. You trust me, right?" There it was again. That word. "Of course," I said, setting my fork down. "Just promise me you'll talk to me before making any withdrawals. Big ones, I mean." He looked almost offended. "I always consult you." He didn't. 2 days later, I got a notification from an old email linked to our bank. It was a security alert. A $25,000 wire transfer had been initiated. Josh didn't mention it. The next morning, I brought him coffee in bed and asked him what time he wanted dinner. He never knew I saw it. That afternoon, I went to my attorney. We drafted a protection clause. I moved my LLC into a private irrevocable trust. I separated all accounts that weren't already detached. I filed for property shielding quietly, legally, permanently, just in case. Because now it wasn't about suspicion. It was confirmation. He had violated our financial agreement. And worse, he didn't even think he had to tell me. It was the beginning of something irreversible. A shift in energy, in trust, in reality. Josh had stopped seeing me as a partner. He saw me as capital. And while he was busy spending what he thought was ours, he had no idea the real wealth was never even on the table. He thought I was the silent wife. But I wasn't silent. I was listening. And I wasn't weak. I was waiting for the exact moment to take everything back. There's a point where disappointment stops hurting. It stops cutting. It just lands dull, heavy, like a rain you've been standing in for hours. You don't run. You just stop pretending you're not already soaked. That's how I felt the night I found the second credit card. Not ours. Not the shared one we used for groceries and furniture and flights we never took. This one was hidden in his desk drawer, under a stack of printed crypto receipts and unopened mail from our HOA. I wasn't looking for it. I was searching for a spare charger. Funny how truth hides where you're least expecting it. The card was black. Heavy. One of those elite ones that brag in metal. It wasn't in his name alone, it was in his name, tied to the business address of a company I'd never heard of. When I looked it up, my stomach turned. Senesis Consulting LLC. A shell corporation, registered 6 months earlier. In Nevada. Its listed business was investment management. But it had no employees. No website. No license. Just a name, a P.O. box, and a paper trail. And the paper trail led straight to Josh. I opened one of the envelopes stacked nearby. Inside was a statement. The credit card was maxed at $47,500. Casino charges. Wire transfers to private wallets. Multiple first-class tickets to Miami, Vegas, and Cabo. There was a charge for a luxury watch. $2,000 in champagne at a place called Velvet Mirage. And $6,000 labeled only as entertainment. It wasn't business. It wasn't even a side hustle. It was recklessness, dressed up in keywords. I sat down in the desk chair, the envelope still in my lap. I didn't feel angry. I felt attached. As if I was watching a movie of someone else's husband. A stranger with my last name and the keys to my life. And suddenly, I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed with him. Or shared something real. Or felt seen, not scanned for value. That night, I copied everything. Scanned each page. Uploaded them to a private cloud. I recorded a backup copy on a USB drive and labeled it Hayes Archive. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the back porch, and replayed every moment I had ignored. The missed calls. The offhand comments. The way he always looked relieved when I didn't ask questions. Like he was getting away with something. Because he was. The next morning, I told him I had a client emergency and needed the day. He kissed me on the cheek and went off to work, same fitted shirt, same cologne, same smug confidence. He didn't notice the tension in my shoulders. Didn't see the way I locked the drawer behind me after he left. He never suspected a thing. That day, I went back to my attorney. We started phase 2. We filed a protective order over my personal savings and business earnings. We set up auto-monitoring of joint accounts. We flagged his credit pulls. We checked for liens on the house, and sure enough, he'd applied for a second mortgage. One I never signed. That was the last line. He had leveraged our home, the house I helped design, the walls I painted with my own hands, without asking, without blinking. And the worst part? He used my name in the application header, then crossed it out, then typed his own. He knew what he was doing. He was gambling on the idea that I'd never find out, that I was too soft, too trusting, too hands-off. And maybe I was once, but not anymore. The woman he married? She's gone. The woman sitting across from a lawyer in a downtown office on a rainy Tuesday morning? She's building a quiet war plan. And this time, there will be no warnings. No fights. No shouting. Only documentation. Only strategy. Only execution. Josh had started a game he didn't know the rules to, and the next move was mine. The day I started laying the trap, the sky was cloudless. Bright, crisp, Oregon blue, the kind that looks photoshopped. People always imagine these moments begin with darkness. But no. The day I started reclaiming my life, the sun was shining. I had just come back from my attorney's office, a corner suite in a brick building downtown, 3 floors above a bookstore and an old cafe that sells $7 chai lattes I never complain about anymore. Because that morning, I signed the paperwork that would sever every financial artery Josh had unknowingly been feeding on. I walked out of that office with 2 signed directives and a temporary restraining clause on all joint property decisions. He hadn't been served yet, but he would be. And I wasn't done. That night, I made dinner. Yes, dinner. I cooked his favorite. Lemon-roasted chicken, herbed potatoes, sautéed garlic spinach. I set the table. Candles. Napkins. Wine. He walked in from work at 7:48 p.m., smelling faintly like overpriced cologne and bourbon. He paused, confused, when he saw the candles. The table. Me in a dress I hadn't worn in over a year. Anniversary, he asked, suddenly nervous. No, I said with a soft smile. Just felt like surprising you. He relaxed, smiled back, kissed me on the forehead like he was proud of himself for marrying me. We ate. He talked about work, about crypto, about Mark and some new AI-adjacent investment that was about to blow up. I nodded, asked polite questions, laughed when I needed to. Inside, I was watching, calculating. Because Josh Carter always told the truth when he thought he had the upper hand. He was cocky again. That meant he had made another move, a big one. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I checked his laptop. I didn't need a password. He used the same one for everything. Our anniversary. The date I always remembered. There it was. A new wire transfer confirmation. $50,000. From our joint equity line. To Senesis Consulting, his shell company. He had just drained the last of what was technically still ours. And now the trap could begin. I didn't confront him. That would have been emotional. Reactive. Weak. Instead, I prepared the 3 pieces I needed to close the loop. 1. Proof of his financial misconduct, already gathered. Statements, email trails, legal documentation. 2. Legal fencing of all my assets, already complete. The apartments. My LLC. The private trust. All walled off. 3. A decoy. A weapon of misdirection. And that I was building now. It began with a simple lie. I think I need to start looking for a part-time job, I told him over coffee one morning. Client work's slowing down. Josh looked up from his phone, barely hiding his smirk. Yeah? Want me to help with your resume? Maybe, I said, biting my lip. I've just been anxious about money lately. I know things are tight. That sentence, I know things are tight, was the bait. And he took it. Within 24 hours, he started shifting again, not the angry kind of shift, the manipulative kind, the kind where he got gentle, attentive, suddenly sweet. Don't worry about working, he said that night. I've got us. I'm making moves. Just hang in a little longer. I nodded. The next day, I booked a notary and signed the transfer forms for the 3rd apartment into a separate LLC, masked under a shell trust with a generic name, Ellis Creek Holdings. It was untouchable now, hidden, untraceable. Even if he found the others, which he wouldn't, this one was now invisible. I started moving small sums from my LLC account to that trust. 1,000 here, 2,000 there. Unnoticeable, but strategic. And then I did the unthinkable. I offered to co-invest. Over dinner, I brought it up casually. You said Mark was opening that new portfolio, right? I asked, sipping wine. Would it make sense for me to buy in? Josh blinked. This was new, unexpected. You want to invest? I nodded. If I'm going to be leaning on you financially for a while, I'd feel better having some skin in the game. He looked at me like I'd just kissed his ego on the mouth. That's amazing. Mark would love that. I mean, minimum buy-in is $25K, but if you're serious, I'll do 30, I said. His eyes sparkled. I could wire it through our joint account, I continued. Or would you rather I write a check? Josh didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He smiled and said, check's fine. The next morning, I wrote the check. But it wasn't from our joint account. It was from a new account I had just opened under the business trust, designed for one thing only, tracking misuse. The check was written, logged, digitally traced. It would bounce, on purpose, 3 days later when I closed the dummy account. I wasn't trying to fund Josh. I was trying to prove intent, that he accepted an investment from me under false pretense, that he was operating fraudulently, that he was misleading not just me, but using a spouse's funds to manipulate investor optics. I even recorded the conversation legally. Oregon is a one-party consent state. He took the check, deposited it that afternoon. The very next day, he booked a flight to Miami. Not for business, for strategy talks. I knew better.
He was meeting someone.
A new investor, maybe, or someone named Tanya, whose name I'd seen 3 times on his phone in the last month, always after midnight. But it didn't matter anymore, because while he was boarding that plane, I was filing for divorce. I filed it clean, strategic, with a full asset trace and a demand for an immediate freeze on all shared accounts and equity claims. I filed a notice of breach on the second mortgage application. I sent a certified letter to the loan originator detailing the forged application and included evidence. I filed a report to the IRS because Josh had failed to report income from Senesis Consulting for over 14 months. And I sent my attorney every single document, login, recording, and trace I had collected, from the day I saw the credit card, to the check I wrote, to the moment I walked out of our lawyer's office and into my own freedom. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I walked back into our home that night, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the dining table, the same table where he once told me we'd be, building an empire together. He never knew that I'd already built one, and it didn't have his name on it. When he got back from Miami 2 days later, he found the living room spotless, his bags moved to the guest room, and a thick envelope on the table. Inside, a copy of the divorce petition, a summary of the joint asset freeze, a list of account closures, and one final note in my handwriting. I didn't leave you when I found the card, or the crypto, or the loan. I left you when I realized you weren't confused. You were calculated. I protected what was mine. Now you get to see what you never earned. Good luck, Josh. Emily. He didn't call. He didn't scream. He didn't try to break down the door or beg, because by then, even he knew he was outmatched. Josh came home from Miami tanned and smug, like nothing in the world could touch him. He strolled in with that same rolling swagger he always used after getting his way, fresh off a trip I didn't approve, funded by money I didn't authorize, carrying himself like a man who had never been held accountable for anything. Until now. When he opened the front door, the first thing he noticed was silence. No music. No candles. No dinner waiting on the stove. The second thing he noticed was his suitcase, the one I'd unpacked, repacked, and rolled into the guest room, quietly. And the third, the envelope. Thick. Cream-colored. Sitting on the edge of the table like a waiting ghost. He didn't touch it right away. He stood there holding his phone, his keys, his ego. I watched from the hallway, not hidden, just distant, waiting. After a few seconds, he picked it up. I saw it happen the moment he read the top line. Petition for divorce and emergency asset protection filing. He didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. He read the first page, then the second, then the financial attachments. And slowly, the tan on his face seemed to drain out. It was all there. The accounts, the transfers, the unauthorized loans, the shell company, the wire history, the second mortgage, and then the part that hit hardest. The clause stating that I had shielded my entire inheritance before marriage and had since transferred all personal assets into a legally sealed, independently managed trust. He kept flipping the pages like maybe he'd find a loophole. But there wasn't one. He had walked into this trap with his eyes wide open, Except he was too arrogant to see the walls until they closed around him. "Is this a joke?" he finally asked. "No," I said calm. "This is the summary. The court will mail you the rest." He paced. "This is exaggerated," he said. "You're making it sound like I'm a fraud?" I interrupted. "A liar? A husband who forged a second mortgage in his wife's name and used a fake consulting firm to funnel gambling money through crypto accounts." He opened his mouth and then closed it, because he knew I had him, and it only got worse from there. 3 days later, he was served at his office. My lawyer did it during a sales team meeting. I didn't plan it that way, but I didn't stop it either. He came home that night raging. "You humiliated me," he shouted, slamming the door behind him. "No," I said, standing in the kitchen with my laptop open. "You did that all by yourself. I just documented it." "I made one mistake," he snapped. "One financial risk that didn't pay off." "You made 17, I said, clicking open a folder labeled Senesis Violations Index. "And I have receipts for all of them." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Good. That meant he was finally seeing the woman he married. Not the version he could manipulate, but the one he underestimated. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I doubt it. Then the legal dominoes started to fall. The first hit came from our bank. Once they received the notification from the court, they froze all access to joint assets pending review. Josh tried to call his friend Mark, the one who ran that startup. Mark didn't answer. The number disconnected a week later. I later found out there was no company, just a glorified Telegram group of investors who had all been chasing fast flips and dodging taxes, and Josh had just used his last 25 grand to buy into a non-existent coin. The second hit came when his real estate license was flagged. The mortgage company I'd reported him to? They sent the file to the Oregon Board of Real Estate Licensing for investigation. Forging documents, applying for loans under shared ownership without proper spousal disclosure, all violations. He was notified that his license was under review, and his pending applications had been suspended. The third hit came when the IRS opened a file. Turns out, when you run money through a shell LLC and forget to file any income declarations for over a year, red flags go up. His shell company was now part of a small-scale tax audit campaign. They wanted 2 years of financials. He couldn't provide them, because they didn't exist. And the fourth hit? That came from the apartment he didn't know about. The one in Mount Tabor. The one I had moved into quietly the same day he flew to Miami. While he was drinking mojitos with women who thought his money came from tech, I was unpacking books and pouring wine into a kitchen I owned, mortgage-free, lien-free, and husband-free. And when his lawyer tried to claim part of it in the divorce, my attorney handed them a copy of the trust formation, a full property history, and the inheritance will, dated 3 years before I ever met Josh. They never mentioned it again. A month later, we had our first mediation session. He showed up in a suit. Late. Pale. Tired. His energy had changed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was scared. He sat across from me at a long mahogany table, flanked by his new lawyer, someone I could tell was overcharging him already and wouldn't meet my eyes. When they started the session, he tried to shift the story. "She blindsided me," he said. "I was under the impression we were working through things." I said nothing. My attorney slid a folder across the table. Inside, the check he deposited from me, labeled investment buy-in, a transcript of our conversation, screenshots of his crypto account, a copy of the second mortgage, and the court-stamped timeline showing every financial decision made without my consent. The room went quiet. His lawyer flipped through the pages, frowning deeper with every turn. Josh sank lower in his chair. "This is a complete asset freeze," his lawyer muttered. "You left her no recourse." He thought I didn't know what I had. I said quietly. But I did. I just waited for the moment he proved he didn't deserve to touch it. The mediator cleared her throat. "There's not much to mediate here," she said. "We're dealing with a lopsided record of misconduct. I'd recommend settling fast before this goes to court." Josh didn't argue. He nodded. Once. I could see it in his face, the moment he realized he had nothing to bargain with. Everything was traceable. Every trick was documented. Every lie indexed. He thought he was the storm, but I was the one who built the levee. 2 weeks later, the judge signed the order. I kept the house, the business, all 3 apartments, the contents of my trust, and a full release of debt claims against my name, including the second mortgage, which the court declared fraudulent. Josh. He walked away with his car, 2 suits, and a checking account that barely cleared $800. He moved back in with his older brother in Eugene. Claire never showed up again.
And
I slept. For the first time in months, I really slept. No text to fear. No accounts to monitor. No small voice in the back of my head asking, "Are you being naive?" I wasn't naive anymore. I wasn't married. And I wasn't broken. I was free. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It doesn't crash through your front door or throw you a party or sing at your window like a rom-com ending. Freedom arrives quietly, softly, like a breeze through a cracked window after weeks of stale air. You don't even know it's there at first. You just breathe deeper without realizing. The day the judge signed the final order, I didn't celebrate. There were no champagne bottles. No "I told you so" text to friends. Just silence. The good kind. I remember waking up that morning in the Mount Tabor apartment. My apartment, sunlight stretching across the hardwood floors, my body still wrapped in the sheets I'd chosen for myself. No passive-aggressive sighs in the kitchen. No tension vibrating in the walls.
just stillness.
And then, for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Not loudly. Not the kind of laugh that needs witnesses. The kind that comes when your chest no longer feels heavy. Like something's been pulled out of you that you never knew was stuck. That morning, I made pancakes. Just for me. With cinnamon and vanilla, the way I used to before Josh said it was too sugary for breakfast. I left the dishes in the sink. I played an old jazz vinyl. And I danced barefoot in the living room, alone. Because I could. Rediscovery is strange. You think you'll immediately know who you were before the pain. But you don't. You don't go back to the old version of yourself. You create a new one. From scratch. From scars. From stories you never thought you'd survive. For me, it started with space. I cleaned everything.
Digitally.
Emotionally. Physically. I deleted our wedding photos. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need to archive someone who never really saw me. I threw out old clothes, the ones I wore to make him happy, the ones he said were too serious or not sexy enough. I repainted the second bedroom in a deep green and turned it into a reading nook. Filled it with books I used to love, but stopped reading when marriage became a job description. I bought new towels, new bedsheets, new cups, because even things that held water can still carry ghosts. Then I got to work. Real work. I changed the name of my LLC to something that felt like me. Anchor and Indigo. Anchor, for stability. Indigo, for depth, for elegance, for things that stain and stay and still shine. I updated my website, hired a virtual assistant, and launched a series of design packages that focused on women-led startups. Within 2 months, I had 5 new clients. Within 4, I had a wait list. But more than the success, it was the control that mattered. Every contract had my name on it. Every payment routed through my trust. Every hour billed by a woman who no longer asked for permission. And then came the idea.
A blog.
Just a quiet space to write about the things no one talks about. Money. Marriage. Being underestimated. Surviving with style and silence. I called it Silent Assets. It started small, 1 post a week. Then 2.
Then emails started rolling in.
From women who felt invisible. From women whose husbands made them feel like passengers in their own lives. From women who had just discovered what financial abuse meant. They weren't asking for sympathy. They were asking, how did you get out? So I told them, not with shouting, not with lawsuits, not with revenge parties, with paperwork, with planning, with proof, and with a secret no one could see coming. 3 apartments, paid in full, titled in silence. One evening, I got an email from a woman named Ray. She wrote, I've read every single thing you've posted. I'm still with him. But I opened my own account yesterday. I feel like I just started breathing. I stared at that sentence for 5 full minutes. Then I cried. Not for Josh. Not for the years I lost. But for the women like Ray. For the woman I used to be. For the thousands of women out there who weren't stupid, just trusting. Who weren't weak, just taught to stay quiet. Who weren't broke, just never told how to own what they built. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to design rooms. I was going to design exits. I hired a small legal team, created downloadable templates for basic asset protection, launched a workshop, financial fire drills for women who want to sleep again. It sold out in 2 days. Turns out there were a lot of MLS, and they were done playing nice. One Saturday, I was standing on the rooftop of the Pearl District apartment, the most luxurious of the 3, watching the sun melt into the skyline when my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. A voicemail icon. I played it. It was Josh.
His voice sounded smaller now.
Not broken, just dimmed. Hey, I heard about the new business.
The blog.
The clients. I just wanted to say, I didn't know you were this capable. There was a pause.
Anyway, congrats, I guess.
I deleted it. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need it. His validation was no longer currency. His recognition no longer required. His memory no longer mine to carry. These days, I sleep on the left side of the bed just because I can. I take long walks alone, listen to true crime podcasts, and wear the red lipstick he once said was too loud. I have 2 phones. One for business, one for life. And neither of them has his number saved. Because here's the truth. I didn't survive because I was clever. I survived because I prepared. And I didn't win because I fought. I won because I didn't let him know I was a player. Not until I'd already won. People think closure comes like a final scene in a movie. A door slams. A man walks away. A woman stands stronger in his shadow.
Cut to black.
Credits roll. But real closure? It comes in the quiet. In the moments where your phone doesn't ring and you realize you're glad it didn't. In the breath you take before opening your eyes, when peace enters before memory does. In the absence of chaos, not the triumph over it. It took time. Months. But one morning it happened. I woke up and didn't think of him. Didn't reach for my phone. Didn't mentally scan bank accounts or calendar syncs. Didn't brace myself for the weight of a marriage that felt more like debt than love. I just breathed.
Deeply.
And freely. And I knew I was done carrying him. It's strange, what you remember most when things are over. Not the fights. Not the lies. But the ways you shrank. The moments you swallowed your own voice just to keep someone else comfortable. The outfits you didn't wear because they'd spark a comment. The meals you skipped making because they were never the way he liked them. The clients you didn't take because your schedule was already busy enough for a woman. That's what sticks. So, I made a promise to myself. I would never shrink again. The blog became something bigger. A community. A movement. What started as anonymous essays turned into interviews, guest writers, lawyers offering guidance, therapists explaining financial trauma. The messages kept coming. From Texas. From New York. From Idaho, Mississippi, London, the Philippines. Women with voices like mine. Stories like mine. Scars like mine. And every one of them asking the same thing. How do I start protecting what's mine? So I told them. Not just how to hide assets, but how to honor them. Not just how to exit, but how to rebuild. Not just how to survive, but how to design something better. Then came the podcast. Silent Assets hit 100,000 downloads in under 6 months. I told my story first, beginning to end. No shame. No edits. Then came the guests. The attorneys. The survivors. The women who owned businesses, houses, empires, and still had to pretend they didn't, just to keep a fragile man from falling apart. It was never about hating men. It was about returning to ourselves. One fall morning, I stood on the balcony of the Selwood apartment, the one with the fireplace and the ivy-covered brick. I was barefoot, holding coffee, watching the trees turn gold. And for the first time in a long time, I imagined the future without flinching. I thought about partnership again. Not love, not yet. Just the idea of building something with someone who didn't ask me to give up my name to share theirs. Maybe one day. But if not, I had enough. Enough peace. Enough power. Enough space. Josh emailed me once. Months later.
Short. Clipped.
Formal. Just wanted to say you were right. I didn't see what I had. And you saw everything. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I was busy. Busy building something no one could take from me. Not again. These days, when people ask me how I became successful, how I built 3 businesses, 3 homes, a community of women who trust me, I smile.
I don't tell them about Josh.
Or the prenup. Or the check. Or the Miami trip. I tell them this. I trusted my instincts. I listened to the silence. And I didn't wait for anyone to save me. I signed my own permission slip. Because that's the legacy. Not the heartbreak. Not the fallout. But the woman I became because I refused to be erased. Not by a man. Not by marriage. Not by fear. My name is Emily Hayes. I own 3 apartments, a design firm, a business trust, and a piece I didn't know was possible. And I built every single piece of it with the one thing no one thought I had. Silence. Not the kind that keeps you small. The kind that lets you listen, and plan, and rise.